Hello, my name is Prina Doshi, and today I will be presenting about my AP research project regarding gender bias in manager ratings, positions, and promotability. When I first began my research project, I knew I wanted to examine something about management, since nearly every individual in the workforce is impacted by managerial positions. I started reading about the importance of good management practices. As I learned more about management, I noticed that there were many different systems used to identify managers and promote them. Such inconsistencies in promotion practices intrigued me, and I wanted to learn more about whether rating systems should be relied upon. This led me to the first step in defining my research question, in which I asked whether ratings are actually predictive of success. I looked for previous research delving into this subject, in which many papers analyzed how rating systems impacted firm and employee performance. While looking for these papers, I also found research that examined the many biases in rating systems. For example, the idiosyncratic rater effect hypothesizes that a large portion of the variability in ratings can be explained by the raters' definitions of success and their personal beliefs, rather than the employee's actual abilities. Many studies have supported this theory, indicating that rating systems may be much more unreliable than many firms may believe. These papers often examined the effect of biases on gender disparities, finding that women are held to higher standards than men during evaluations. Based on this research, I began to ask how ratings are affected by gender bias. I found numerous studies that use quantitative data from rating systems to conclude that women are often rated lower than men and given worse feedback. Specifically, the work of Rivera and Tilsic was interesting to me, since they found that the structure of a rating system contributed to the amount of gender bias present, with a system out of 10 points having more gender bias than a system out of 6 points. Because of this, I decided to look more closely at specific different rating systems and choose one to study. One of the main rating systems I found was the 9-box template, a popular review system aimed at developing a firm's talent pool. It is generally used to identify future managers. It functions as a 3x3 grid with the x-axis rating performance and the y-axis rating potential. The worst score on each side is a 1 and the best is a 3. While performance ratings are based primarily on a worker's execution of their job, potential ratings more broadly assess a worker's managerial ability. I did not find a significant body of literature devoted to examining the 9-box rating system. This contributed to my decision to study this one specifically. While literature seemed to focus on whether promotions and ratings are predictive of good managers, I was interested in seeing whether firms actually use rating systems to predict promotions, but there was a significant gap in current research. As a result, this became a portion of my final research question. I also wanted to investigate the gender biases I learned about in my literature review, and decided to explore the relationship between manager gender and employee gender. Based on these two interests, I began to question whether ratings are actually fair predictors of promotions. Do ratings discount individuals from getting a promotion based on gender? Specifically with the 9-box rating method, I became interested in learning whether firms are promoting based on performance or potential. My final research question is, to what extent are 9-box ratings accurate and unbiased predictors of promotions? And how do they affect gender bias within a firm's structure? To examine this research question, I developed the following hypotheses based on my literature review. Women will have lower potential ratings than men. Women will receive lower ratings from male managers. Higher operation levels will have a lower concentration of women. Potential ratings will be higher for managerial employees, and performance ratings will also be higher for managerial employees. And finally, that 9-box ratings will predict promotion rates. To assess these hypotheses, I performed statistical inference on secondary data from a large national retailer, including about 900,000 observations that are organized by unique pairings of employee ID and month. I decided to use analysis of secondary data rather than a case study or another qualitative assessment because of the work of Bloom and Reenan, who stated that literature in management research is often not considered strongly by firms, since it is not based on quantitative empirical data. In the dataset I used, stores entered employee information such as age, tenure, job title, race, and gender. During my research process, I also defined the operation level of each employee to learn what level of management they held. I used given job titles and the number of employees they supervised to create this variable. Most of the assessed employees hold titles of entry-level, assistant store manager, or store manager positions. I decided to test the relationship between 9-box ratings, gender, and manager gender using correlation coefficients and ordinary least squares regressions, because these tests would measure the importance of various factors in the rating systems. Using an ordinary least squares model, I decided to control for tenure and store performance, as these factors likely contribute to an employee's ability to perform well in the job. These equations are listed on the right. I also used ANOVA and Kruskal-Wallis H tests, which are statistical tests used to compare the distribution of variables in a dataset. In my research, I used these to examine the distribution of women and the distribution of ratings across various operation levels. Finally, I decided to use a Cox model to predict the likelihood that an employee will receive a promotion. The Cox hazard model generates a hazard ratio, which is the relative rate that an employee will receive an outcome based on a treatment variable. In this case, the treatment variable would be the 9-box ratings. For example, if one group of high-performing employees received a promotion at 2 times the rate compared to a different group who had typical 9-box scores, the hazard ratio would be 2. The distribution of 9-box ratings among employees based on their own gender demonstrates bias against women. I found that 9-box potential ratings were lower for women than men, but performance ratings were higher. The mean potential value for female employees was 1.34 out of a possible 3 points, whereas for men, this was higher at 1.48. This indicates that bias may be occurring primarily when supervisors are told to rate women subjectively on their skills. Conversely, women perform better than men in performance ratings, with an average value of 2.11 compared to male employees' 2.02. This may be a result of the increased objectivity used to develop the performance ratings. These results were also supported in ordinary least squares regressions and correlations, which both showed that the relationship between gender and 9-box ratings was statistically significant. This corroborates the findings of Roth et al. From 2012, who saw that women were rated more poorly for potential than men. While their research was not significant at a confidence level of 80%, my findings are statistically significant up to the 99% level. I further analyzed the relationship between manager and employee gender, as shown in this table. The mean value of potential ratings was highest for female managers and male employees at 1.5, while male-female and female relationships generated lower ratings of 1.34 and 1.35. The opposite result is seen in the performance ratings, where female employees average higher scores than men. Male-female relationships found an average of 2.12, and female-female relations found one of 2.08. These are higher than the average male ratings of 2.04 and 1.99 for male and female managers, respectively. However, I then performed ordinary least squares regressions with 9-box performance and potential ratings as the dependent variables, and manager-employee gender relationships as the factor variables. In potential ratings, the coefficients for female-female and male-female relationships were not statistically different from each other under an equality test. This shows that women generally received lower potential ratings than men, regardless of manager gender. This may be a persisting effect of the overall lower female potential ratings. Conversely, gender-manager relationships significantly impacted the performance ratings for every pairing. I then used a Kruskal-Wallis H test to analyze the distribution of gender within the firm, and found a statistically significant difference in the proportion of women in entry-level, assistant store manager, and district manager positions. In higher managerial positions, males made up a much higher percentage of workers, since 0.67% of males worked as district managers, compared to women's 0.22%. This reveals that the rating biases I found may be reinforcing gender-based organizational differences within the firm. Using an ANOVA analysis to assess the distribution of 9-box ratings across various operation levels, I found that average potential and performance ratings are significantly different across various managing positions. For potential ratings, lower-level employees, such as cashiers, actually had a higher average potential rating than assistant store managers and store managers. However, district managers had the highest average potential rating across all groups, and store managers had higher average ratings than assistant store managers. This shows that the potential rating may be most effective at identifying talent past a certain threshold of managerial ability. For performance ratings, the lower-level employees and managers had lower average ratings than upper-level managers in all comparisons. This supports the conclusion that performance ratings are higher for higher-level employees in general. Finally, I used a Cox model to predict promotions based on a variety of factors, including the 9-box performance and potential ratings, as well as some control variables. The 9-box performance rating yielded a hazard ratio of 1.587, indicating that higher performance rates predict promotions at about 1.6 times the rate that other variables do. 9-box potential ratings yielded an even higher hazard ratio of 2.793, showing that it is a more important factor when deciding promotions than the performance rating. Overall, the Cox model found that 9-box ratings are strongly considered when choosing which employee to promote. For my first hypothesis, where I predicted women would be rated lower than men in terms of promotability, but not performance, the data corroborated this. Women had significantly lower potential ratings than men, but higher performance ratings. The second hypothesis was that male managers would rate women lower than female managers. This was not found to be true, since manager gender did not affect women's potential ratings, and male managers rated women higher for performance. For the third hypothesis, there was a statistically significant difference in the proportion of women and men across operation levels, with women appearing to be entry-level or assistant managers more often than men. These results demonstrate that ratings may be contributing to a structural bias in the firm hierarchy, and they indicate the need for a reassessment of the firm's talent management practices. In the fourth hypothesis, I found that the highest managerial position, district managers, had the highest potential rating. However, entry-level employees had higher ratings than assistant and store managers, showing that my original hypothesis was not entirely correct. My findings corroborated my hypothesis that higher-level managers will have higher performance ratings. Finally, the Cox model supported my sixth hypothesis, that 9-box ratings would predict promotions. Potential ratings predicted promotions more strongly than performance ratings, indicating that this rating system is being used in its intended manner to promote based on managerial ability. However, since women are systematically receiving lower potential scores than men, this discounts a significant portion of the workforce from receiving a promotion they may deserve. Based on my research question, the 9-box ratings appear to be accurate predictors of promotions, but they are not fair due to the bias against women in the potential ratings. Future research should consider looking into how education and store location affect ratings, since these were not considered in my research and may be confounding the results. Education especially may have a large effect on ratings because some individuals who have a higher education may be more qualified for certain promotions. The primary stakeholders for this research include firms and employees, since all individuals in a company are affected by the quality of managers. Firms can use the results of this study to develop more effective human resource management policies. When women are limited by low 9-box scores, they have a smaller chance of receiving a promotion to a manager position. These results suggest that bias in ratings may be contributing to the glass ceiling effect. As McKenzie et al. Found that women are adversely affected in open-ended feedback sessions, firms could consider providing evaluators more specific instructions and metrics to rate employees on, in order to reduce evaluation prejudices. The methods described in this study can also be used by firms to assess and reduce their own bias levels. If companies have access to data about female and male ratings, they can perform regressions to analyze the level of bias in their hiring process. Overall, the findings of the study are extremely important for firms to consider, since promoting the best manager, regardless of gender, will help contribute to more productive firms. I would like to thank Dr. Alan Benson, my expert advisor from the University of Minnesota, for all of his help and guidance for this project. His help has been invaluable in developing my research process and encouraging me overall. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Prina. So you've had an opportunity to prepare for the oral defense questions. I'll ask you one from each category: the research process, your depth of understanding, and reflection on the inquiry process. So my first question for you is, how did the choices you made when designing your research method impact your research process?
So while designing my method, because I chose analysis of secondary data, I needed to make sure that the statistical tests I used aligned with the data types that I chose. So that was part of the influence that my research method had on my process. I also decided that I wanted to look into the differences across operation levels. And because of that, I needed to create the operation level variable. This took a lot longer than I had originally expected and expanded the pre-processing portion of my research process before I could actually get to analyses.
Can you tell me a little bit about the limitations that your method had in kind of influencing your new understanding?
Yes, so my method, because it was a secondary analysis, I knew that it was not an experiment, and so there are certain confounding variables that could impact the results. Specifically, I did not have data about education in my firm, and so I wasn't able to control for that. So I know that the results are slightly less significant because of this, since education might be confounding some of the results. So I know that I'm not able to apply this as broadly. Also, because this data is focused on retail, it is not as broadly applicable to other firms. But I do think that it's a good beginning point, and that even though this is just a retail firm, since it is so large, it is applicable and should prompt further research.
Excellent. And then last question is, if you could kind of think about what was the most important research skill that you developed as a result of this process, how would you apply that to future endeavors?
Yes, so I think that the most important research skill I developed as part of this was the ability to communicate more clearly, both about my specific project and communicating any questions that I had. So because of the high level of the statistical nature of my project, while writing my paper and presenting about it, I had to think about how to present it in a manner that makes sense to a broad audience. And I think this is a really valuable skill because it's important that especially the stakeholders in my research would understand how they are impacted by this. Furthermore, it's important to place this research in context so that stakeholders can understand why it is significant in terms of the glass ceiling effect and how their firm could be better off with better ratings. So this skill of learning to communicate my understanding, both in context and at a high level of expertise, was really valuable to me. And I think that this will help me in college and in the workforce as I began to participate in more research, and also in the workforce, where I want to be able to describe how my work will influence or help other people.
Sounds great. Wonderful. Well, you've done a great job. At this time, that closes the formal part of our presentation.